Is coming to testify and give depositions here in Ways and Means. We have not talked to them beforehand. They've simply come up. Again, we don't feel that we want to do anything that would interfere with the IG's investigation or this committee's investigation. So people have come up, and to the extent they've been interviewed, they've done that on their own without any conversations with me.
Now, the gentle lady just asked you about morale at the IRS, and the IRS is a kind of tough position because nobody seems to like the IRS. On the other hand, if you don't get revenue, you got a problem. We have a problem as a nation. But when you think about the reduction in employees, and based upon what Mr. Kane said that the gentle lady just read, it seems like something has to give. And I'm just curious as to what's giving. You follow what I'm saying? In other words, if you have, based upon what Mr. Kane said, you're pulling people from different areas to do certain things. You said that some of them have to have court responsibilities and deadlines. The point is, something is got to give, something. Right. And can you tell us what we're losing?
Well, what has to give is obviously we have 10,000 fewer employees than we had 4 years ago. We have 500 fewer in the Office of Chief Counsel. So what happens is people either have to spend a lot longer working. At some point, you run out of things you can do. We've done our best and taken people from around the agency, particularly around Chief Counsel, and put them on the production effort. To do that means that work that they otherwise would have done doesn't get done because we have no capacity to add more people, to hire more people. We're only replacing 1 in every 5 people who leave the agency, so we continue to shrink rather than expand. So we haven't complained about it. I mean, we basically simply produce documents as fast as we can. We've explained that our biggest problem and obstacle is that we have this sort of archaic system where you've got to search each hard drive to pull out data to actually get it into a search machine, which we'd like to change going forward. But it does mean that, particularly in the Office of Chief Counsel, you put them under more stress. It makes it much more difficult with the other ongoing day jobs they have. My concern, more importantly, though, is over the course of certainly the 3.5 years I've left, we will have other issues. And as we ask people to do productions and just respond to congressional inquiries, if they become subjects of depositions and cross-examinations, it's going to be harder to get people to decide they want to leave their day job and help us respond to Congress. So that's our only broader concern. But again, we think it's appropriate, and we're happy to cooperate with the committee as best we can.
Thank you.
I would just make one point. The witness testified that they don't talk about this issue and prepare and discuss and prep for it. That's just not accurate. We interviewed Mr. Orsler yesterday, and he told us specifically that when Steve Manning came and briefed the Ways and Means Committee, there was prep sessions done for Mr. Manning to get ready to come in front of Congress. So to portray it as you're not talking about this issue as you bring people before Congress is just not accurate. And regarding the morale issue, if the IRS would have been willing to let Tom Kane come and be interviewed, we wouldn't have had to issue the subpoena. One of the things that impacts morale is when you get a subpoena. I get that, but that's your cause. You caused the subpoena, Mr. Koskinen. We didn't. We tried for weeks to get Mr. Kane to come and be interviewed, and you guys said, no, can't do it. So we had to issue the subpoena, and we got all kinds of information that contradicts testimony you've given in front of Congress. So that's the issue. If we're talking about morale, you could have helped morale of the very employees you represent if you'd let him be interviewed by us without a subpoena.
Mr. Chairman.
Yep.
Right. We actually agree subpoenas sound different, but when they come for an interview, it's still under oath, and it's still a transcribed interview, and it looks just like a deposition, and that's for people who've never done it before. Of concern. I get nervous.
Yeah, and my point is, by you making it so we had to subpoena that only adds to the anxiety of the employee. So that's your creation on your employees, not ours.
And that's why we were delighted to work out with you a schedule where there won't be subpoenas, but people...
We appreciate that. But it took a subpoena to get that rolling. The gentleman from South Carolina is... Oh, I'm sorry.
Wait a minute. I just asked you for one, because we have a tendency to ask questions and not let them answer. I want to understand this. I think it's for the benefit of the entire committee. Why did Mr. Kane have to be subpoenaed? Why is that?
Because we tried to...
No. I didn't ask you. I asked him.
I didn't know you were asking.
No. I'm asking him.
That's fine.
Thank you.
We were in the process of discussing the production of witnesses. We, as I say, we're concerned about interfering with the IG's investigation. While we were doing that, as the chairman said, then Mr. Kane got a subpoena, which did allow him to appear without any further ado, and did allow us to basically have a conversation about setting up a production schedule of witnesses. So the chairman is right. We were in the process of trying to do this, but I would say we'd take some responsibility for the fact that you had to do a subpoena. I would agree with you.
You take all of it. We asked, Mr. Kane told during his deposition, because he had to be subpoenaed, he told committee staff that he wasn't even notified by you, Mr. Koskinen or Ms. Duvall or whoever, that we had requested an interview. He didn't even know that. All he knew is he got the subpoena. So you didn't even tell him that we were trying to interview him. That's what he told us in the deposition last Thursday. So it's all on you. You're the reason we had to subpoena the individual to get his testimony.
But he eventually came voluntarily, is that right?
Yeah, but
all right.
After he hired private counsel, after we sent his subpoena. Gentleman from South Carolina is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's good to see you again, Commissioner. I want to read a quote to you from June of 2014. I want you to tell me if you know who said it, okay? We confirmed the backup tapes from 2011 no longer existed because they have been recycled pursuant to the IRS normal policy. Do you know who said that?
Sounds like me.
It is you. Can you tell us who we is in that quote?
The we is the IRS. I tend to take responsibility for the agency and talk about it. I was advised when the draft report was submitted to me that people had talked to everyone in the agency to ensure that in the course of our several months of looking for backup tapes.
So we is the royal we, just speaking on behalf of the entire IRS. How about the word confirmed? What does the word confirmed mean to you? That you confirmed the backup tapes no longer exist?
Confirmed. When I read that, I asked the question and was told
by whom?
I don't remember who. We had 4 or 5 people who were working on the report. And was told, and I gather Mr. Kane said in his testimony, that that was accurate as of June 13th.
What does the word confirmed mean to you?
Confirmed means that somebody went back and looked and made sure that, in fact, any backup tapes that had existed had been recycled.
Are you still confirmed?
At this point, I have no basis for not being confirmed. I do understand the IG advised me that they were looking at tapes. I have not been advised as whether any of those tapes...
Well, confirmed is a pretty strong word, Commissioner. Are you still confirmed that no backup tapes exist?
Well, at this point, I know the IG is looking and he hasn't found anything, so as far
as
I know...
I'm glad you mentioned the IG, and I find this confounding. I find it vexing. That once the IG is involved, nobody else can do anything. That is not supported by the law. Can there be a criminal investigation while there's an IG investigation?
There can be all sorts of investigations. What I was talking about...
Right, and there can be a congressional investigation while there's an ongoing IG investigation also, correct?
Of course.
And there can be an IRS investigation. If there were sexual harassment or discrimination in the workplace, are you telling this committee that you would wait until the IG investigated it before you would stop some insidious practice?
We would take whatever action was necessary, but as a...
Precisely. You would not wait until an IG concluded his or her investigation.
Can I answer that question?
Sure.
Our policy, and it's been my understanding when I chaired the Council of Inspectors General across the government, that if the IG starts an investigation, the agency will not themselves run a competing investigation to try to get there first. Basically, the IG advises us what the investigations are. When they advise us about those investigations, we allow them to proceed.
Well, let me tell you, let me give you possibly an alternative view, Commissioner, which is that people cite ongoing IG investigations when it suits them to not cooperate, and they don't cite ongoing IG investigations when it doesn't suit them.
That's not my policy.
Well, you can certainly understand how a cynic might view it that way, right? Because there's nothing about an ongoing IG investigation that would keep you from doing your job. Just like there's nothing about an ongoing IG investigation that keeps the Department of Justice from a criminal investigation or a committee of Congress from a congressional investigation. There's nothing talismanic about an IG investigation.
In In this particular case, as a general matter, my policy has always been if the IG is doing an investigation wherever I am, we won't interfere with that investigation. We want it to be independent.
Well, I mean, the word, look, words have consequences, Mr. Koskinen. Nobody is asking you to interfere. You can have a dual investigation without interfering, can't you?
I think it's very difficult.
So you are saying that if there was an allegation of sexual harassment or racial discrimination within the IRS, you would not look into that until the IG had completed his or her investigation. Is that what you're telling me?
I am not telling you that. I'm telling you as a general matter, that's not what the IG would be investigating. As a general matter, those claims would come to personnel. They would be immediately investigated by our legal department.
Well, the IG doesn't have criminal jurisdiction. The IG doesn't have jurisdiction over legislative policy. The IG doesn't have jurisdiction over appropriations. All three of those are very important areas. So those should be ongoing even while an IG is doing his or her investigation, correct?
Actually, the IG does do criminal investigation.
No, sir, they refer to an entity that actually has the power to indict, which does not include the IG.
They actually, my understanding, like our criminal investigation.
You should go back. It might be the same people who gave you the understanding that you were confirmed that the tapes don't exist. So my advice is to be very careful who you take your advice from. And I'm going to say this in conclusion, Mr. Koskinen, I really could not believe the colloquy that you had with one of our colleagues about the morale at the IRS. It takes a lot to stun me, but that stunned me. Here's a piece of advice I would give. If the folks like Lois Lerner and others would have spent more time working on the backlog, more time working on their caseload, and less time targeting groups, and less time trying to overturn Supreme Court decisions they didn't agree with, maybe morale would be better, and maybe their backlogs would be lessened.
Would the gentleman yield?
I'd be thrilled to.
Commissioner, I just want to maybe summarize what the gentleman was asking you with a question. Do you have full faith and trust that your IG is doing a thorough investigation at the same level as would be done if you were doing it as the commissioner?
I do. I said earlier, I have a lot of confidence in the Inspector General. They have far more capacity in some of these areas. They've got 15 people working on this. I am very comfortable and confident that they're doing a thorough job. And I've told them we'll do whatever we can.
So at least as to your own investigation, you consider the IG's investigation to be your investigation?
I do not. We do not control the IG. He's very independent. He's doing an independent investigation of all of this. I am satisfied that when he gets done, we will have an independent review and investigation of what went on.
Thank you.
Gentleman from Virginia.
Will the gentleman from Virginia yield for just one follow-up question?
We give time at it if the gentleman, it's his call, but if you yield, I'll give you some additional time. I've been very generous.
I thank the chair. Of course, I'd be glad to. I thank the gentleman from Virginia. I want to follow up on the gentleman from South Carolina's point, because what you're just saying is that your belief is that it is wrong for you to do an investigation at the same time as an IG is doing an investigation. Is that correct?
As a general matter, if we were doing an investigation, it would interfere with.
So what you're saying is that your predecessors, who did exactly that in 2012, were wrong. Because when the IG started it, they did their own, under sworn testimony, they did their own investigation. So what they did was not right.
Everybody has their own policies. I don't know what they did or didn't do.
But in your opinion, that would not be right.
If the IG...
I just want to show the hypocritical point there that is not consistent with what IRS has already done.
My point only was it's consistent with how I've behaved in the past and how I'll behave in the future. My view is the IG is an important independent source of investigations. Whenever the IG is doing an investigation, I think it's important to cooperate with it and not interfere with it.
All right. I thank the gentleman from Virginia for yielding.
Great question, gentlemen.
I ask unanimous consent that all his time be
He's got it.
I thank my friend from North Carolina. I thank the chairman. Welcome back, Mr. Koskinen.
It's always a pleasure to be here.
I can tell it must be a thrill and the highlight of your week. And I guess we're going to do this, as long as we're in session. By the way, just a sort of a sidebar. I wish my friend from South Carolina was still here because his concern for morale at the IRS is really touching. Gosh, if we were really that serious about it, maybe we wouldn't have slashed $800 and something million from your budget in the last 4 years and recommended another $350 million this year. But that's a different matter.
Actually, you actually recommended another $1 billion on top of the $350 million. So at this point, we're $1.35 billion underwater.
$1.35 billion, yep. But the morale, we'll keep on flogging people until the morale is improved. That seems to be the philosophy of some of my friends on the other side of the aisle. But all right, I'm glad we're talking about the IG because I'm amazed that J. Russell George, the TIGTA, would have thought it wise or prudent to completely omit from the May 14th final audit report any mention of a critical and I think astonishing analysis that was conducted by TIGTA's own head of investigations the weeks leading up to the release of the May 14th report. Mr. Chairman, without objection, I'd like to enter into the record the conclusion of TIGTA's Deputy Inspector General for Investigations, Tim Camus, which was sent in a May 3rd, 2013 email to TIGTA's Acting Principal Deputy, IG Michael Phillips, Acting Deputy Inspector General for Audit Michael McKenney, Chief Counsel Mike McCarthy, Assistant IG for Exempt Organizations Gregory Kutz, and 2 TIGTA employees whose names have been fully redacted. It's just a one-pager. I thank the chair. This astounding email from TIGTA's chief investigator concluded that after obtaining and reviewing 5,500 IRS emails from identified staff members of the exempt organization's division in Cincinnati, that in addition to there being no email directing staff to target Tea Party or other political organizations, and no conspiracy or effort to hide emails about such a directive, according to Mr. Camus, and I quote, review of these emails revealed that there was a lot of discussion between the employees on how to process the Tea Party and other political applications. There was a be on the lookout list specifically naming those groups. However, the emails indicated the organizations needed to be pulled because the IRS employees were not sure how to process them, not because they wanted to stall or hinder the application. There was no indication, I'm still quoting, that pulling these selected applications was politically motivated. The email traffic indicated there were unclear processing directions, and the group wanted to make sure they had guidance in processing the applications, so they pulled them. This is, he says, a very important nuance, unquote. Would you agree with that finding, Mr. Koskinen?
Sounds right to me.
Have you any idea why the Inspector General would not include such a critical finding after all of the storm and drama, and after the press compliantly giving the headline to my friends on the other side of the aisle every single time Tea Party targeted? Here's a critical piece of information, maybe even a smoking gun, if we're looking for exoneration, from the head of investigations in TIGTA's own office. Why would that not be included in the May 14th final audit report?
I have no idea.
Is it worthy of your time to ask that question, respecting the independence, of course, of the 2 offices?
I would not ask the IG that question. He's done his report. He's done his investigation. When they do investigations, they have any number of them going on. When they do the reports, we sometimes we agree most of the time, sometimes disagree with recommendations, sometimes disagree with process. But we do that in the orderly course of responding to their report. Thereafter, we don't go back and question.
But Mr. Koskinen, here you are for the 3rd time before this committee, but probably not the last. And your reputation and that of your organization, has been called into question with a charge that has unfortunately not been critically examined as often as I'd like by the media, despite our efforts on this side of the aisle. Here is the head of investigations in your organization under TIGTA that says otherwise, that directly challenges the propounded thought that only Tea Party and conservative groups were challenged, and it was deliberate and it was targeted. He says otherwise, and the TIGTA doesn't put it in its final audit report. By the way, an Inspector General who has been questioned by a number of us up here, and we have formally requested an investigation of his conduct before the Council of IG. So he's under a cloud himself, And I've heard my friend, the chairman, Mr. Jordan, question other employees of the IRS because of their political giving. Well, Mr. George was a Republican staff member in this committee. He's given political contributions to Republican candidates. He's a Bush appointee, and he met, solely with the Republican side of the aisle in getting ready for his audit. That raises serious questions. I mean, if it's sauce for the goose, it's sauce for the gander about his independence. But this is a critical piece of information, it seems to me, and I can't imagine you could be copacetic with its elimination from an audit report that's a pretty critical audit report for your organization and indeed for your leadership.
Well, it's an interesting piece of information that obviously is useful for people to review. As I've said, I do have confidence in Mr. George that he's independent. He actually is the Treasury Department inspector for IRS. And we've supported him in the past. I think he is doing an independent review of all of this, and I look forward to his response and findings about what happened with regard to the hard drive crash.
Well, how about and his response to why he didn't include this important missive from his head of investigations in the final audit report of May 14th?
That's a question that I'm probably not going to ask him.
I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
I would just ask the gentleman which way do we want it. Do we want to say this committee can't get access to witnesses because there's an ongoing Inspector General's investigation, and at the same time, so we're waiting for the Inspector General to do his good work, and at the same time criticize the work he did before, where he identified the targeting of conservative groups? It seems to me you can't have it both. You can't have it both ways.
Well, Mr. Chairman, there are a number of us who have raised and been quite consistent in raising questions about the objectivity and professionalism, frankly, Mr. George. Mr. Cartwright and I have both filed a complaint, formal complaint, and I'd be glad to share it with the chairman because it's
then
fairly detailed.
With all due respect, then you should be advocating we get access to the witnesses and not wait until the Inspector General has them first.
Well, actually, maybe a new Inspector General is really the answer.
Well, relative to this idea that somehow it was just mismanagement, 80% of the applicants in the backlog were filed by conservative groups, less than 7% were filed by liberal groups. According to the Ways and Means Committee, the IRS approved every single group with the word progressive in its name. USA Today reported the IRS did not approve a single tax-exempt application filed by a Tea Party group from February 2010 to May 2012. During the same time, they approved dozens of liberal and progressive groups. The idea that was just how, if it was mismanagement, it was mismanagement in a targeted way because none of the treatment to conservative groups was given to the same way to progressive groups.
Mr. Chairman, I have a memo from Gregory Kurtz saying targeted is actually not accurate. I also have materials that were presented to IRS for training that have elephants and donkeys. They have Tea Party. They have Patriots. They have progressive.
298 cases in the IRS backlog. Only 3 had the word progressive. 4 used the word progress. None used the word occupy. No progressive group was denied its C4 status. Hundreds of Tea Party conservative groups were in fact denied. Some still waiting. Just for the record.
Well, I guess you and I could argue that all day, Mr. Chairman, and we need to get on with this hearing. And allow Mr. Koskinen to get back to his job.
Mr. Koskinen, why June 13th? Why that date? Let me ask you this. Why not February 2nd? When you first learned there was a big gap and a bunch of emails that looked like they were missing. Why not February 4th? When, as Mr. Kane testified, and Mr. Koskinen, you know Mr. Kane. Do you know Tom Kane?
I do know Mr. Kane.
Is Mr. Kane a solid lawyer, professional, good employee at the Internal Revenue Service?
Certainly is.
All right. So why not February 4th when Mr. Kane, who testified just last Thursday, said they knew her hard drive had crashed? Why not tell us, look, we may have a problem. Why not come and disclose that to someone on February 4th? Or how about this? How about mid-February, when Mr. Kane said last Thursday that we knew then in mid-February that the data on her computer was unrecoverable? Why didn't you tell us in mid-February? Or how about the hearing we've talked a lot about, Mr. DeSantis raised in the opening question, Opening questions. Why not at March 26th? Why not disclose on March 26th when you were in front of this committee and everyone on both sides of the aisle asked you about Lois Lerner's emails, and you assured us that you would produce all her emails, and yet you knew, according to Mr. Kane's testimony, good professional employee, lawyer at the IRS, you knew that in mid-February her emails were unrecoverable.
You should be careful to note that's what Mr. Kane knew. That's not what I knew.
Well, that's a problem too. That's something you should have known. Mr. Kane's a high-ranking official in charge of documents. A lawyer, you didn't know?
I did not know.
Do you know Kate? Do you know Kate Duvall?
Pardon?
You know a person named Kate Duvall?
Kate Duvall, I do know.
And what is Kate Duvall's responsibility? Is that what's her title at the Internal Revenue Service?
She's counselor to the commissioner.
So she's counselor to you.
Yes.
She's your lawyer.
Yes.
She knew in mid-February, according to Mr. Kane's testimony. She didn't tell you?
What she told me, and I've testified at some length, at least a couple of hearings on this, and I'm happy to stand by that testimony if you want to go over it again. Basically, what I've told you is in mid to late February, I knew that we had taken the Lois Lerner emails that had been produced, and instead of looking at them from search term,
Not the point. Tom Kane said they were unrecoverable.
I did not.
Kate Duvall, and he said he told Kate Duvall. Did she tell you that they were unrecoverable?
She did not tell me they were unrecoverable.
That's a problem. Why not tell us April 4th when Ms. Duvall briefs this committee, both Republicans and Democrat staff members, and the briefing was about how we would deal with, how the IRS was going to deal with committee requests for concerns about the lost, or excuse me, producing Lois Lerner's emails. Didn't know they were lost at the time. Why didn't you tell us April 4th? Ms. Duvall could have told the committee at that time.
I've testified at some length in the past that are, and earlier today.
But here's the key question. Let me jump in here a second. Why not mid-April when you knew? In fact, let's put up the slide. This is a question we had earlier in one of our hearings. Why not when you knew? What day did you learn you could not get all of her email? I learned that in April. Why not April?
As I testified then, and I've testified on numerous occasions, my judgment was, A, we needed to find out what emails we did have. We needed to put it together in a full report, which we did. And
why not any time in April? Someone at the IRS told someone at Treasury, who then told someone at the White House, according to press reports. So if it was good enough to pass on to Treasury and the White House, why not tell us sometime in April?
Because I thought that at that point we did not have the full information as to what was involved, how many emails were there.
You learned in April they were unrecoverable. Your chief lawyer in charge of document production knew in mid-February they were unrecoverable. Kate Duvall knew in mid-February they're unrecoverable, and you wait until June 13th.
Right.
Why June 13th?
First of all, I would note all of those emails that determined whether they were that she had a hard drive clash or not, what she had tried to do, our emails were provided to this committee, and the tax writers knew as early as the fall she had had a hard drive crash. The materials were produced. The materials about the email chain about her trying to restore her hard drive were produced to the tax writers in April and to this committee in May. So there was no secret that we were hiding. We were processing through.
No. You were giving us emails. You weren't, but you didn't tell us there was emails you couldn't give us. That's my question. Why didn't you tell us the IRS had destroyed emails that belonged to Lois Lerner? Why didn't you tell us that?
It's not clear. First of all, emails from Ms. Lerner may or may not have been lost. They were not destroyed as a conscious effort by the IRS to destroy them.
The tapes were recycled, and
Right.
that's when backup tapes are destroyed and they're recycled. So that at some point they're destroyed. Why didn't you tell us you could not produce those emails, that they were lost in April?
This hearing is noted to be an update on what we're doing. I have given you at least two different occasions.
Okay, then answer the question. Why June 13th? Why not June 12th? Why not June 10th? Why not May 10th? Why not, if you couldn't do it in April, why did you have to wait 2 more months?
We're going to be here a long time if you want to repeat all of the questions I've answered in the 11 and a half hours of hearing.
You know what I think?
But let me just answer this question. But I've answered it before, and I'm happy to answer it again, but it is in the testimony I've given before that you all have read very closely. We were producing Lois Lerner emails. Our strategy and thoughts were, and I thought the most efficient way to proceed was to complete the production so we would know how many Lois Lerner emails we had from her account, how many Lois Lerner emails we'd been able to retrieve from other accounts, so you would have a full idea what the universe was. I had hoped that we'd be able to find out how many other problems we had with custodians, and we would produce all of that as a report to the committees and a public report that would explain what our email process is, why it's so complicated, what we had determined about Lois Lerner's emails and her crashes, what the emails we'd been able to recover, and it would be a full report. June 13th was a Friday. I should have known Friday the 13th was going to be an interesting day. We had been asked by the Finance Committee, which was considering trying to come to closure on their report, whether we would give them an update on our March letter, in which we had advised the tax writing committees that we'd completed the production of all of the information we had about the determination process, which was the start of the investigation. That's what the IG was focused on, as you've just discussed. We said we would do that. They then called, and we were going forward. We didn't know when. They then called and said they would like that report no later than that Friday, because they were going to have a meeting the following week. So we pulled the document together at that point. We had not completed, as I noted earlier, the review of how many custodians were involved with hard drive crashes and what the impact were. We had no idea if you lost a hard drive, one of the custodians, and in fact, one of the custodian hard drive crashes was in February of this year, not very relevant. So to meet the Friday deadline, we actually produced that document and shared it with everybody on Friday, June 13th, and it was to meet a request from the Finance Committee, which was having a meeting the next week and wanted to consider whether they had enough information to do it.
So your testimony is the Senate Finance Committee drove the timing of when you disclosed that you had lost Lois Lerner emails.
Yes, because we were actually going to produce that
I think
report.
I think it's something different. I just do, and you obviously you're going to disagree, but I think you were never going to tell us. You got to remember what happened here. Judicial Watch does a FOIA request, and they learn on April 18th of this year that the IRS and the Department of Justice had been working on possible ways to bring false claims action against Tea Party groups. And there was an email from that FOIA request. Richard Pilger, a lawyer at the Justice Department, and Ms. Lerner had an exchange in 2013 after a Senate hearing. We saw that email. We said, you know what, we're going to talk to Mr. Pilger, the lawyer at the Justice Department, who was meeting with Ms. Lerner just days before the TIGTA report went public in May of 2013. So on May 6th, we interview Mr. Pilger. And we learn in Mr. Pilger's opening statement in that deposition, we learn this. He said, I'm reading straight from Mr. Pilger's statement, turning to my contacts with Ms. Lerner in the fall of 2010. Shocked us. We didn't know that they were meeting clear back in 2010, that the Justice Department was meeting with the IRS clear back in 2010. In the fall of 2010, at the direction of the Chief of the Public Integrity Section at the Justice Department, Jack Smith, I contacted the Internal Revenue Service. When I contacted them, they directed me to Lois Lerner, who met once at the Public Integrity Section offices for about an hour with some of her staff, my chief, Jack Smith, other personnel from my section, and the FBI. So now we learn in 2010, the Justice Department with the FBI is meeting with Lois Lerner. And so we said, you know what, we better subpoena documents from the Justice Department. And we said to the Justice Department, we want any communications with Lois Lerner that you've had. And we get this slide. We get this email. Let's put this up if we can. We get this communication from Lois Lerner and Richard Pilger. Now, Mr. Koskinen, did you give us this email? Do you know?
I don't know.
Well, I can tell you didn't. We got it from the Justice Department. And after we got this from the Justice Department, we contacted you all on June 9th, and we said, hey, how's come we didn't get this email from you? There's no 6103 issue with this email. And we were concerned. This is email from clear back in 2010. So we contact you, Mr. Koskinen, in a letter. We said, you know, we're wondering why the IRS hasn't sent us this email from 4 years ago. And then suddenly 4 days later, you tell the Finance Committee, the Congress, more importantly, the American people, you know what? We lost Lois Lerner emails. We've lost a bunch of Lois from that time period. My theory is this, Mr. Koskinen. You guys weren't ever going to tell us until we caught you. And we caught you because Judicial Watch did a FOIA request. They found out there was this collaboration going on between the Justice Department and the IRS. We took that email. We interviewed Mr. Pilger. Mr. Pilger told us he met with Lois Lerner in 2010. We then subpoenaed Justice. They complied with our subpoena, gave us the email. We contact you and say, why didn't you give it to us? And then you knew you were caught. You said, you didn't tell us this, but you knew. We didn't give it to you because we don't got it. Now we got to tell the whole world we lost them. And what better time to do it than Friday, June 13th, saying we're complying with some Senate concern, send in a letter, put it on page 7 of the third addendum, and say, you know what, we may have a problem with Lois Lerner emails. That's what I think.
Good.
And I think all kinds of people logically going through this would say, you know what, that's what prompted these guys 4 days after they get a letter from this committee saying, why didn't you send us these emails? You decide, well, we better come clean. Because plus, you've already told us you knew clear back in April that you lost them. So you wait 2 months and then you decide, wow, we better do it June 13th. Just 4 days after they figured out Justice and the IRS were working together in 2010. And they got an email that indicates that, and we can't produce it.
When you find any direct evidence to support that assertion, I'd be happy to see it. If you think that this organization in 4 days could produce that report, you don't understand how large organizations function. You could ask anybody who worked on that report. There's a whole series of people. That report was under production for a long time.
I'm not saying it wasn't. I'm saying, though, including the statement we lost Lois Lerner emails was put in that report.
It was in that report, and it is within that report.
And one thing I've learned in these investigations, it's always important to look at the timeline.
Look at the timeline.
Look at the timeline. You knew in April. You didn't tell us till June 13th. What events happened between April, when you knew, and June 13th? One key event was the FOIA request from Judicial Watch, finding this collaboration between the IRS and the Justice Department, us getting that email because we subpoenaed the Justice Department. They give it to us. It's in the relevant time frame, 2010 to 2012, when you lost Lois Lerner emails, and suddenly you say, you know what? They got us. We got to come clean.
Mr. Chairman.
And then you do the letter on June 13th.
Can I respond? That's a fairly serious charge. There are a whole set of senior staff people in the Senate Finance Committee who will dispute your assertion. And if you find any direct evidence of this to anybody who worked on that report, in terms of the timing of it, the fact that we were otherwise not going to deliver it, I will be not only surprised, I'll be astounded, because there is no such evidence. And it seems to me, and I've been very patient about all of this, but before you make that kind of charge and claim, you ought to have better evidence than a single email dated June 9th.
Mr. Chairman.
We got a few other emails from that exchange.
Mr. Chairman, yield for one moment.
Be happy to yield.
I know the Chairman, a lot has been said about what Thomas Kane said. Well, last week, Thomas Kane told our staffs that the IRS always intended to alert us about Ms. Lerner's lost emails. So, I know you have all these theories. Unfortunately, our committee has been one where we put out these headlines and then we go chasing facts that in many instances never exist. But I'm just saying, include everything when you're asking your questions.
Great point.
Okay?
All I'm saying is this. They get a letter from us on June 9th where they know we now have this email from the Justice Department that they can't produce. And 4 days later, they tell the world, we've lost Lois Lerner emails. When they knew that, according to Mr. Koskinen's testimony in questioning from me, that he knew in April they couldn't get Ms. Lerner's emails. So they waited 2 months, and then when they decided to tell us was 4 days after, on a Friday, 4 days after, we knew there was emails we were getting from Justice that we weren't getting from the Internal Revenue Service. Well, now, all I'm saying is that timing is pretty suspect, particularly in light of the fact all the other things we've heard from the IRS. One computer crashed, no, it was 7, no, it was 8, now it may be up to 20. We can confirm that there's no backup tapes that are available. Oh, we can't confirm that now. There may be one available. In light of everything we've heard from the IRS, when you start looking at the timeline, it looks pretty suspect. And all I'm saying is, I'm not sure they were going to tell us.
You didn't say I'm not. I'm sorry. You didn't say I'm not sure.
Be happy to.
Mr. Chairman, this has been very interesting because one member on your side, the gentleman, I don't know his name, said that the man was under investigation, and that I had heard that I was in that entire hearing, and he never said that. by the way, the Justice Department never said that. Then you, Mr. Chairman, of course, have made some strong accusations. And when you make these kind of accusations, I would appreciate it if you would just give the witness an opportunity to answer, because these are the kind of allegations that tarnish one's reputation. And you've come up with this theory, and I'm not saying your theory is, your theory is what it is, but you got to be able to answer, please. That's all I'm asking.
Appreciate the ranking member.
Good. As I said, I haven't seen Mr. Kane's testimony, but it doesn't surprise me that he would say that we had been producing this report for some time and clearly planned on making it public. You can talk to people. We'd be happy to give you those contacts. The people we talked to at Finance, who were in fact did have a meeting the following week, had asked us for an update that we did provide. They asked for it no later than that Friday. I am confident, and I am very confident, that no one working on this report had any idea about it other than that we were going to produce it and provide all of the information to the public. I think any other assumption is not based on facts.
Are you willing to make those witnesses available? Are you going to make us subpoena them so they can come here under oath and testify that, yes, in fact, from mid-April, when the commissioner knew that Lois Lerner emails were lost, we were planning on telling the Congress as soon as we got all the information. They'll come and testify to that, or will they come and testify, you know what, after the June 9th letter, we decided we better put in the information that we lost Lois Lerner emails?
I don't think you'll find anyone will make that latter testimony.
But my question to you is, are you willing to have those people come testify? Tell us who they are, who the people who worked on this report.
We'll be happy to talk with you about you.
So now you want to...
You've already talked to some of them, and you have others on your schedule.
All right. Gentleman from Nevada is recognized. Mr. Horsford.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I do share concerns by some of my colleagues on the other side about why the IRS delayed in providing Congress with notification regarding the unrecoverable emails, because it raises questions. I don't share in the chairman or other members' conspiracy and rush to judgment about any motives as to why there was a delay. And I feel, again, as I've said in previous meetings, that we failed to get all the facts in order to then make a proper decision. I'm not a defender of the IRS or any other federal agency. I've said from the beginning that I believe that there was wrongdoing. But the chairman and others want to conclude or make conclusions about that wrongdoing without justification or evidence to support their assertion. Now, Mr. Chairman, you just read into the record some comments by Mr. Pilger that I had asked to be entered into the record, the full transcripts. So I'm going to ask again for unanimous consent that the transcribed interview opening statements of DOJ officials Richard Pilger and Jack Smith be allowed to be entered into the record, particularly since you just handpicked certain statements, and I'm requesting the full transcript be entered. Will the chairman please provide that courtesy for this to be entered into the record under unanimous consent?
If the gentleman would yield for just a second, if I read from the opening statement that Mr.
That's what this is.
If you're just asking for the opening statement, not the full questions from Democrat staff, Republican staff, but just the opening statement from Mr. Pilger and Mr. Smith, we'd be happy to do that.
Thank you.
All right.
I also want to follow up to some of the claims that have been made by my Republican colleagues and give you an opportunity to respond. It has now been stated twice today that Mr. Kane testified during his July 17th interview that in mid-February 2014, the IRS realized that Lois Lerner's emails would not be recoverable. I want to clarify here because I don't want Mr. Kane's statements to be taken out of context. It is true that Mr. Kane told us that he had discovered that Ms. Lerner's hard drive had crashed and that the contents of the hard drive were unrecoverable. However, that does not mean that Mr. Kane said that he thought in February of 2014 that the IRS would never be able to produce those emails to Congress. In fact, Mr. Kane was asked, quote, "And as of March 2014, you were not aware that the IRS would be unable to recover all of Ms. Lerner's documents." And he answered, quote, "That's correct." He further explained, as you have, that the IRS was engaged in an extensive process to find Ms. Lerner's emails from other sources at the IRS. And in fact, those efforts were successful and yielded the production of an additional 24,000 Lois Lerner emails. Is that correct, Mr. Koskinen?
That is correct.
Mr. Kane also explained that the IRS's goal with respect to the document productions to Congress was to fully comply with those requests as expeditiously as possible. He stated with respect to fulfilling that goal, and I quote, "I have tried my best, and everyone that I work with have tried their best." Commissioner Koskinen, do you share that belief that every effort was made to provide this committee and others with those emails that you were able to recover?
I do.
And beyond the issue of failing to notify us in a timely manner, then the question becomes, what can be made of why that timeline was delayed?
Right, and as I've said, first of all of the emails in question had been provided in the normal course to this committee and the other investigators. So there was no attempt to not produce information that showed that, in fact, there had been a problem with Lois Lerner's hard drive. In fact, none of us, IRS or investigators, noted that in the fall productions there were emails from Lois Lerner saying she had had problems with her hard drive and had lost emails. But everybody then appropriately was looking at subject matter. But it's not as if any of these emails were withheld or not produced in a regular manner. So that as we were working in April and May, pulling all the information together, trying to determine how many emails we actually had, we were producing emails as a regular matter, and the emails that were the basis of our June 13 report had all been provided previously to all of the investigators.
Thank you.
Gentleman's time's expired. The chair now recognizes the chairman of the committee, Mr. Eisen.
Thank you. Commissioner, I really wish we had your IT guys here instead, because it is inherently a little hard when we're asking you so many questions that are not related directly to your past experience. But I appreciate your continuing to volunteer to come up. Hopefully, as we interview some of your IT professionals and others involved, it'll make it easier to direct questions. But a lot has been done to talk about this. A drive this large that apparently went so bad that not a single piece of information could be saved. And you've asked us to believe that your very special experts couldn't save one piece of data from this drive, or one just like it, correct?
That's what I was advised, yes. And that's what the email strain that we produced and I testified about at previous hearings says.
The American people don't believe that. You realize that it's the idea that we can recover the last 17 or 18 seconds from Challenger exploding above our atmosphere, falling to the sea, and being left under the sea for a year, that we could recover the voice from that, makes people wonder why a product that simply came in and out of the office with Lois Lerner every day, suddenly not one piece of data could be recovered. Doesn't surprise you. The American people just have a hard time believing that, does it?
Well, I don't know whether the American people broadly view that, but I do understand that when our Criminal Investigation Division, which are experts at extracting information, say they could not recover any emails, that seems probative on the one hand, but on the other other hand, I could understand people saying, well, if you kept trying.
But do you think it's reasonable for us to check with your criminal investigation people, interview people involved to see if that passes the reality check in spite of what the American people may think or the doubts they may have? Do you think it's fair for us to check into that?
Yes, and in fact, those interviews are being scheduled. Have some of them, I gather, from the press release I saw from Ways and Means, that some of those IT people have already been interviewed.
So it's fair for us to do an interview and to investigate on our own in order to bring the credibility that we bring as, if you will, a doubting Thomas to the process. You'd agree with that?
Yes, I've never had any concern or objection to the oversight. As I said, spent 4 years in the Senate. Senator Riberkoff was on the Government of Operations Oversight Operations, chaired that committee. I'm a big believer in congressional oversight.
And I appreciate that you are. One of the things we discovered that was not made available to us early on was the existence of what's called OCS, this chat capability that exists within the IRS's network. Is that right?
That's correct. I spent some time testifying a couple of weeks ago about that.
Right, and you wrote me back a letter when I asked about it, and in the letter it said basically that no records were kept because it was the equivalent of visits or phone calls. Do you remember that in the letter?
Yes.
Now, would it surprise you to know that we disagree with you? That in fact, it is the opinion of this committee that the Federal Records Act, unless you can train and guarantee that no policy decisions, none of the kinds of activities we're discovering in email could be done on OCS, that in fact you should turn on that switch and you should collect and you should retain OCS chat unless you can assure us that it's not doing the equivalent. And I'll be brief, but I'll explain something to you. Years ago, when I was a subcommittee chairman and President Bush was in office, we investigated the Mineral Management Service. And what we discovered there was that they had systematically signed leases that were simply wrong and cost the American people billions of dollars. And we could find not a shred of evidence in emails to show this, the absurdity of how this came to pass. So after we deposed people repeatedly, we finally discovered that they all admitted that only the cover sheet was brought to them, that they signed or initialed and they never read the leases. So that one mistake was passed through multiple signatures. But more importantly, as we went through the process, what we discovered was at Mineral Management Service, a now defunct and disgraced organization to a certain extent after the BP disaster, they had a policy of what they called talking over the transom. Lawyers made no memos for the record. Lawyers went out of their way to have no paper trail of things they did in their consultation. I will tell you today that has to end. That the American people expect that the Federal Records Act, the Presidential Records Act, is not something to be avoided, and you should not be trying or allowing the bypassing of future oversight that you said rightfully so with your experience you believe in. Maintaining data so that it can be analyzed by your Inspector General, who's conducting your primary investigation, you have full confidence in. Activities going on in Ways and Means, which are slightly different than ours, our activities or anything in the Senate are hampered by policies of any part of government that allow the use of something that clearly bypasses future oversight. So I hope today that in addition to your willingness to cooperate and help us in getting to the answers I mentioned on this, that you'll recognize that your letter is not acceptable, that email is a substitute. The phone call and the visit, in the old days, you would have done a memo for the record if, in fact, you wanted to do your job. That isn't being done. Emails and these chats are extremely important. And I'd like to have a second round at some time, but I would yield back at this time.
Mr. Chairman, I have a point of information.
Yesterday, Chairman Issa informed committee members that he'll be holding yet another hearing on this topic next Wednesday. We have the notice. Could the chairman please inform us who will be testifying at that hearing on Wednesday?
Pursuant to the rules, we'll inform at the appropriate time, but at this time, they haven't sent anything out, and I appreciate your inquiry.
So you don't know, or you won't tell us?
I think we'll
Regular order, please.
we'll do regular order, and the chair at this point will now recognize the gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Bentivolio, for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Commissioner, if any of my constituents were not as forthcoming as the IRS, there would be a presumption of guilt. They would be fined and or have their wages garnished and or liens laid on their home and or savings accounts seized. When I go back to the district, I had the opportunity to talk to many IRS former employees of the IRS, now retired. And I asked them what they thought of what was going on at the IRS, and I heard despicable behavior every step of the way. The IRS, no longer credible. I think at this point, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to yield back.
Would the gentleman yield?
Yield to gentleman from California.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And in regular order, this is helpful not to need a second round. Commissioner, there's been approximately a year of production of emails. In your earlier hearing, I remember it might take 2 years, sort of an estimate. But let me ask you a question. Have you reviewed the timeline when this committee issued lawful demands for lowest learners emails? Have you reviewed the timeline of who did what and when?
No.
Would you be prepared to deliver to us a timeline, meaning calendars, activities of individuals who were charged with going out and finding those emails, what they did and when they did it?
As I say, we've had over approximately 250 people doing that work.
Well, no, actually, you've had people redacting and you've had people legally reviewing. I'm only talking about who went and got the information, the emails, who accumulated them, the gathering.
Yes, that's not just 1 or 2 people. That's a set of people. But we'd be happy to provide you the information in any form that would be usable.
Well, here's the inquiry I'll ask you today. And again, you know, we appreciate your coming, but you're not the IT guy. You're not any of the 200 people per se. It is clear now from this side of the dais that we issued requests and subpoenas. 2 things were to occur. One, at the moment we issued our first letter, it required that you preserve information. There's a question about whether that was preserved, because in order to preserve it, you'd have to go look for it. So the tapes that now your own people have admitted they're not sure whether they exist or not. They've undercut your claim that you're very comfortable that they were gone at the end of 6 months. That means that nobody went out to say, where are the tapes? What are the tapes? Are there any? Additionally, in order to not know that Lois Lerner had this gap, either you weren't looking extensively all at once, or, and this is one of my concerns, people just didn't want to admit that they weren't going out and looking for emails by essentially what we expected, which was to do a keyword search on a server and deliver the data. Remember that for months, even before you came on board, we were being told, you know, well, here's some keywords and we want to search on these keywords. And the IRS was adding keywords that allowed them to deliver the false narrative that progressives were being targeted. They were adding self-serving words and they were searching them. This committee had a reasonable expectation that you were searching the entire database. You were searching not 6 months worth of emails, not 6,000 emails or less that had been preserved, but you were searching the historic emails. Not until recently, the last 6 weeks, did we understand that if that was how you were getting all of your information, you were knowingly looking at a small fraction of the historic 2 or 3 year email selections. We now understand no more than 6,000 emails, only 6 months of record. So it is now appropriate for us to understand your search, your employees' search techniques, what they did, because at some point they must have started searching. Okay, who has PSTs? Send us your PSTs. Or did they, and this is why we have to ask directly, did they send out one of these? Do you have any information relevant, and please send it to us? Because the keyword search would imply that in fact they were accumulating all these PSTs, these downloaded local files, and then searching them. If in fact that process didn't begin in earnest in the first week or month, if in fact your predecessor was delivering selected data from what was basically the last 6 months of things still preserved, we need to know that, because it does appear as though in this long investigation there has been either an absence of a willingness to disclose problems or an absence of real fact-finding, getting these emails quickly, or deliberate obstruction. We don't know which, and we would like to know, as I said in the beginning of this, who went looking for what when. Not interested in who read them, not interested in who edited them, who redacted them, or who released them. And that information would be equally valuable whether it was pursuant to the House or Senate's request or to Ways and Means or this committee's request. But giving us that gives us a timeline of who was involved in going and looking, so we know who knew that in fact something like Lois Lerner's personal email on her personal hard drive was of any relevance, because this committee didn't know that there was a lack of a central database for the first almost a year of this investigation. I thank the chairman and yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Chair now recognizes the gentlelady from Wyoming for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have no doubt, Mr. Koskinen, that morale at the IRS is low. I want to tell you about morale in Wyoming. The people of Wyoming who I work for all feel targeted. They think the IRS is out to get them. They are lower than a snake's belly about the IRS because they know that Lois Lerner was brought into the IRS from the Federal Elections Commission, where she had a history of political targeting, political bias. They know that she was tapped to enforce the largest tax increase in history, Obamacare, after she targeted conservative groups while overseeing 501c4s, tax-exempt organizations. They saw her come to this committee and say, I've broken no laws, and then take the fifth. They know that we subsequently found out that she did break a law, that she provided confidential taxpayer information to another federal agency, which is against the law. And they know that so far she's gotten away with that the Justice Department isn't doing anything about it, and that she got away scot-free. They know that when they get letters from the IRS, that they're being targeted. I have a constituent who got a letter and an investigation from the IRS that has cost her $50,000 just to close her estate, because they keep asking her, what make and model is your bed? Your bed? They think her bed is some expensive antique. Incidentally, she is a very active member of the Republican Party. She feels targeted. Morale is low in Wyoming because our government has turned against us. So this is a legitimate investigation. I hope it continues at length. I hope it goes on until we get to the truth. because the people we work for feel like the government is getting away with their tax dollars that they don't know. They feel like the government is denying them tax exempt status that they deserve. They feel like they can't trust the IRS. That's why this investigation. That's why you're here and ask the same questions over and over. I'm sure it's frustrating. We're frustrated too. But it's because our constituents are mortified and scared and are going to take matters into their own hands because they don't feel we have the ability to do it ourselves. So, with no apologies for the morale at the IRS and no apologies for how many times we're asking you the same questions over and over, Mr. Chairman, while I thank you for your attendance, I do yield back the balance of my time.
Would the gentlelady yield?
I will.
Some people just don't have enough questions for you, Commissioner. I mentioned the timeline and my interest in that. Let me just ask you one other question, which is, when you look at this investigation and you look at the fact that a federal judge is now ordering you to show certain things, you look at your IG's investigation, you look at our investigation, are you aware and do you recognize that the three separate channels are perceived and in reality are very different as to what your responsibilities are and how you approach them?
My response to all of them is the same. If people have, from any branch, government questions, we have an obligation to respond to them in response to...
Well, I appreciate that, but the IG does, in fact, work under you. He has limited authority.
Absolutely not.
I understand his independence, but in fact...
he works for he's the Treasury Department IG. Right. We have no control, influence over him. He doesn't work in the IRS.
But in fact, he has testified that when he wants information, he has to ask for it, and he may not always get it. That in fact, there's a process, and sometimes it's very frustrating for him to get information, even though you say he's independent. He doesn't have the authority to demand things and automatically get them. Isn't that true?
I've never had, in my time here or other places, an experience with an IG not able to get the information he needs, and I am committed, as Mr. George knows, that whatever information he wants in any investigation, he's welcome to have.
Well, we'll certainly hold you to that. Thank you.
I'm happy to be
Yield back.
Thank the chairman. The other members who do want to do a second round, we will do that. And so I'll kick it off and recognize myself. And I just want to reiterate, people have mentioned the morale. And granted, a lot of the things that happened were before you were there. But I do think it's worth mentioning that there are a lot of taxpayers who have had their morale hit. When they see some of the conference spending that's gone on, $50,000 for a Star Trek parody video and other lavish expenses on their dime. And again, that was before you were there, but that really irks a lot of folks and certainly our constituents. I think the same goes for the targeting when people feel like they were being targeted or in fact were targeted simply from exercising their constitutional rights. I think that hurts their morale too. And so I just think it's important that we mention that. Now, a lot has been going on about when you knew there was a problem, why you delayed telling Congress. And I think it is the case that the standard that would be applied to an official such as yourself is not simply what you actually knew, but what you should have known. In other words, you can't bury your head in the sand and not be apprised of what people in your organization know. And so I think that's going to be a question is, clearly, there were people at the senior leadership level in the IRS early February, mid-February, who knew that the problems were more substantial than what you indicated to us that you personally knew. So the question is going to be, why did you not know more? And I think that goes into what I and some other folks have raised, and I know my friend Mr. Cartwright disputed the notion that this is being investigated by the Justice Department. And just so we're clear, because I don't want to be lobbying charges that aren't true, here's the transcript from last week's hearing with James Cole, DOJ Deputy AG. Chairman Jordan, the fact that the commissioner, meaning you, at the Internal Revenue Service delayed telling Congress, the American people, the FBI, and the Justice Department is a matter that you are going to investigate. Mr. Cole replied, we are going to look into what the circumstances were around that, yes. And so we're concerned about it, and the DOJ seems also to be concerned about it, and I think that that's important to know. Let me ask you this. You mentioned that you have seen the Ways and Means press release about their conducting interviews with different IRS technical witnesses about what in fact happened to the hard drive. And so they told Ways and Means that the hard drive was scratched and that data was likely recoverable from it. And of course, the IRS just last week in federal court has filed a declaration saying, consistent with I think what you've testified to, that the hard drive was destroyed and in fact no data was recoverable for it. So my question is, what's an American to think when they see some witnesses telling a congressional committee scratched may be recoverable, but yet the IRS is representing in federal court that it was destroyed and completely unrecoverable?
I wasn't there, and I haven't talked to those people, and I don't know what that interview yesterday
But they
was.
would, the technical people would be the ones that we would most want to talk to about that, correct?
All I know is the emails that I've testified at a couple previous hearings about show that there were efforts made by Ms. Lerner and the IT department to restore the hard drive. It went to the Criminal Investigation Division and their experts, and they said they were not able to retrieve information from that hard drive. That's all I know. That's what the emails contemporaneously at the time showed and said was that they had tried, the experts in the IRS had tried, they were unable to recover any information.
Okay, so, and I read the pleadings and I take that point, but we are getting conflicting information, it seems, in the Congress at this point. So I think it's going to be important that that be resolved, because clearly you can't be telling the court one thing and then having people in the organization who are on the ground and maybe had intimate knowledge telling the Congress the other thing. I'm almost out of time, but just very quickly, switching gears a little bit, the D.C. Circuit issued an opinion about the IRS's regulation as respects to Obamacare subsidies, taxes, and mandates in the states that have exchanges not run by a state, but run by the federal government. Given that right now there's a circuit split where you have the Fourth Circuit saying that basically it was either a close call or Scrivener's error, you have the D.C. Circuit saying actually the IRS didn't have the authority to issue that ruling. Are you going to rescind that rule until this can be resolved by the Supreme Court, or what's the IRS's position?
It all is run by HHS. We have, our regulation said that in fact it was appropriate and acceptable to go through the court, through the federal marketplace. We have no plans until the issue is resolved in court to rescind or change that rule or change our preparation for the next filing season.
And is it your position as the IRS that you've construed that to be that there may have been a drafting error in the statute, but the intent of Congress was that the subsidy should go, and is that why the IRS has taken the position that they've taken?
I'm supportive of the Justice Department opinion, which was upheld in the Fourth Circuit, not upheld in the D.C. Circuit. I don't have a different view of the legality. I think the Justice Department puts it very well, that they think the statute is enforceable and the regulations are appropriate.
Okay, I am out of time, and I will now yield to the ranking member of the full committee, Mr. Cummings.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. On July 9th, you appeared before the Subcommittee on Government Operations for a hearing entitled Solutions to Close the $106 billion Improper Payments Gap. Even though it was clearly not the stated purpose of the hearing, Republican members of the committee asked you a number of questions regarding the committee's investigation into the IRS treatment of applications for tax-exempt status. At the hearing, Chairman Ice also released emails from Lois Lerner regarding the IRS instant messaging system called OCS that he claims proved that Ms. Lerner, quote, intentionally sought to hide information from Congress, end of quote. Despite your testimony that you were unfamiliar with the system and would be happy to look into its use, Republican members repeatedly questioned you about the specifics of OCS. Commissioner, now that you have learned of the system. Can you describe what OCS is?
Yes, OCS actually provided a letter to the committee that Chairman Issa referenced earlier. What I've been advised is OCS is a system that exists in Microsoft systems, and it basically allows people around the country, its primary use is to have a teleconference, and you can put the same information up on the screen and everybody looks at it at the same time, and it's a way to have a telecommunications gathering in a meeting. It allows you also to, in effect, have an instant messaging capacity. If for those who use it, not everybody uses it. I don't use it because I didn't know it existed. That much like your cell phone, somebody, if they see you're online, can send you a text message, and it's like calling you on the phone. So, like all text messages, it's a sometimes faster or more efficient way to communicate than picking up the phone and calling someone.
Despite the fact that the email exchange occurred on April 9th, 2013, nearly 2 years after Ms. Lerner's computer crashed, and more than 1 year after the Inspector General's audit began, Chairman Issa declared that the email exchange was a, quote, smoking gun. On July 11th, the IRS sent a letter to the committee explaining that OCS messages, quotes, are substitutes for telephone calls and in-person meetings, end quote. And, quote, the IRS does not currently preserve communications sent and received through OCS, end quote. Is that accurate?
That is accurate.
The IRS further explained that the Federal Records Act, and I quote, does not require recording or retention of telephone calls or meetings as a substitute for telephone calls and in-person meetings that would not normally be recorded. Communications sent through OCS are not considered records subject to federal records or other retention requirements, end of quote. I ask unanimous consent that the letter be entered into the record, Mr. Chairman.
Without objection.
Commissioner Koskinen, does the Federal Records Act require retention of the OCS messages?
It's my understanding it does not, and in fact, it's my understanding that NARA reviewed our record-keeping process, and in 2011 we got a score of 93, and in 2012 got a score of 99. But we are meeting with NARA. We've reached out to them to try to work with them to ensure, A, that we are complying with the Act now, and if there are ways we can improve our official records keeping, we're very anxious to do that. As I say, ultimately, we hope someday to be able to afford to have, in effect, an email system that's a system of record.
Are you aware of any evidence that Lois Lerner used the OCS system to intentionally hide information from Congress or the Inspector General?
I am not. As noted, we produced 43,000 emails from her account, so she obviously used emails significantly.
To the best of your knowledge, has any IRS employee used OCS system to intentionally hide communications from Congress or the Inspector General?
I have no knowledge of any such activity.
Once again, your testimony is corroborated by the results of the committee's investigation. After receiving hundreds of thousands of pages of documents and interviewing dozens of IRS employees, the committee has not identified any evidence supporting the Chairman's allegation that Ms. Lerner or any other IRS employee used the OCS system to intentionally hide information from Congress. I want to thank you, Ms. Koskinen, for your testimony. I have 14 seconds left. Is there anything else you wanted to tell us?
No, I would just add to the Congresswoman from Wyoming that talking about she works for taxpayers. My view is we all work for taxpayers. I am, as the head of the agency, basically ultimately employed by the American people. We are have important responsibilities to be careful stewards of the money we spend. It is ultimately money comes from the American people. And we have an obligation to ensure that everyone is treated fairly and the same. And to the extent that there are people who have lost trust and confidence in the IRS to do that, one of our major challenges is to restore that trust. Whenever we're going to continue to contact and audit people, as I've said in the past, some of them will be Democrats, some will be Republicans, some may not belong to a party, some may have voted for one person or another, some may be active in politics. And what they need to be confident of is when they hear from the IRS, it's not because of any of that, it's all irrelevant. When they hear from us, it's because of some question in their tax return. And if somebody else had that same question, they'd get be heard from us as well. That we have an obligation and a commitment to treat everybody fairly and evenly across the board. I have met with over 11,000 IRS employees across the country, And I have never seen a more dedicated workforce dedicated to the mission of the IRS, to providing taxpayer service, to enforcing the Internal Revenue Code. And I'm delighted to be part of that workforce.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Before I recognize the chairman of the subcommittee, I just will, just with respect to Lois Lerner's emails in terms of OCS, when she initially wrote the email to Maria Hook saying she had a question about OCS, she said she was cautioning folks about email. And now we've had several occasions where Congress has asked for emails, and there have been an electronic search for responsive emails. So we need to be cautious about what we say in emails. Someone asked if OCS conversations were also searchable. I didn't know, but told them I would get back to them. And so I just think it's important, the context when she was asking about OCS was to try to evade congressional oversight. And with that, I will recognize the chairman of the subcommittee, Mr. Jordan.
Thank you, Chairman. Let me go to the Hallebeck decision, Mr. Koskinen. Does the IRS have an obligation to now tell taxpayers the tax credit may, in fact, not be available?
We actually I think we have an obligation to keep taxpayers informed about all aspects of the Affordable Care Act, all aspects of the Internal Revenue Code. We have a program of public information to advise taxpayers now if they're getting premium tax credits before these decisions. If their information changes, they should go back and make sure the credit is correct. To the extent that we go forward.
Are you going to educate taxpayers on the potential ramifications of the Hallebeck decision?
We are actually, will put out information regarding it. As I say, right now at this point, two courts have come to different conclusions, and so we don't intend to make any difference changes. And therefore, I think our advice, although it's not totally in my control, because it's a policy issue of how to deal with it, and we're just tax administration. But my general assumption is people will and should continue to operate as they have thus far until we get to a final court decision. And the courts have not indicated that anyone should do anything different.
Let me go to the Ways and Means statement yesterday, their press statement. One of the things they say in the lead paragraph is it says, in-house professionals at the IRS recommended the agency seek outside assistance in recovering the data. Are you going to do that? Or have you done that already? Outside professionals to recover data lost or maybe that may be recoverable on the scratched hard drive or the tape that now in fact may be available? Is that something the IRS is going to do?
As you know, my understanding is that that hard drive is a normal process. Once the Criminal Investigation Division determined they could not restore any information from it, that hard drive was recycled and no longer exists.
When that took place, when you were trying to get to the data, did you in fact go get outside assistance in trying to recover the data?
I was not around at that time, but I am not aware of any attempt to go outside the IRS.
So even though in-house professional says, you know what, this might be a little above our pay scale, we should go get the outside tech experts, the super whiz kids who can do this stuff, we should bring them in. To your knowledge, that was not done?
To my knowledge, I don't know even about that statement. I haven't seen his transcript as to whether that, I was not aware that that recommendation has been made, but I have no information indicating that that was done, i.e. that outside experts were sought. All I've seen is the emails that I actually have testified about in which Criminal Investigation Division reported they could not restore the hard drive. But I have no information that we did, the IRS at that time did anything else.
They did not. I just want to be clear. It's your understanding that there was not outside professionals who were brought in to try to recover the data?
That's right. I have no indication that was done, and it's my assumption by the emails that I saw when I testified that when the criminal investigation...
So no outside experts were brought in, even though in-house experts recommended they be brought in?
I had no information about the in-house recommendation.
You don't know what the Ways and Means Committee is reporting, that they said in-house professionals said, in fact, we should go get some outside experts. This is beyond our scope. We need someone else to come get this because this is such important information. And you're saying you don't think that was done?
I don't think it was done, but I haven't seen the full context of what that gentleman said either.
Okay. You don't think it was done, and you don't know if it was asked for. They're reporting that it was asked for, and
it wasn't done.
It wasn't done,
right?
Which is a problem. Which is a big problem when your tech experts say we need outside tech experts to come in and get the data. No, we don't want to do that. It's unrecoverable. That was as reported by what you've said in testimony and what's been filed with the court that is unrecoverable.
have to remember this was 3 years ago, and there were no investigations ongoing at that time. And in fact, the IRS had already taken extraordinary attempts even to go to the CID.
But that's
people.
the point. It's 3 years ago. That's why they said we need the outside experts. That's why they wanted to help. You're saying it didn't happen, which is a concern. Let me just do one other question if I could. So, according to your testimony a month ago, the Ways and Means Committee said the IRS in February identified documents that indicated Ms. Lerner had experienced a computer failure in 2011. Consistent with Mr. Kane. You knew in February there was a problem. February 2nd, February 4th, you knew there was a big problem according to Mr. Kane's testimony. Mid-February, you knew it was unrecoverable. Your testimony says, in mid-March 2014, this review, we learned the data stored on her computer hard drive was determined to be unrecoverable. So Mr. Kane says he knew in February, you knew in mid-March.
That's what I actually
But you were kept abreast.
I actually knew in mid-April, and that's a misstatement on my part. If you read my testimony before this committee and the now 3 hearings I've had.
So what you said, this is your written testimony in Ways and Means. Is it not accurate?
My written testimony?
This is what you had. This was your opening statement and what you said to the Ways and Means Committee. The IRS in February identified documents that indicate Ms. Lerner experienced a computer failure in 2011. Mid-March review 2014, the data stored on her computer hard drive was determined to be unrecoverable.
No, I'm sorry. That's correct. I didn't. That was what the IRS knew.
Here's my question.
Yes.
Mr. Kane says on February 4th he knew. You indicate in your testimony mid-February we knew there were big problems, and you indicate in mid-March we knew it was unrecoverable. You knew, even though your key staff people, Mr. Kane and Ms. Duvall, knew in mid-February. You testified February 5th to the House Ways and Means Committee, February 26th to the House Appropriations Subcommittee on Financial Services, March 26th to this full committee, and April 8th to the Senate Finance Committee. In those hearings, you were asked about Ms. Lerner, an email, and different things. You had 4 different opportunities in front of Congress. So I'm wondering, in the back of your mind, were you wondering when you answered these questions that we're going to produce all of Lois Lerner emails? When we're going to comply? In the back of your mind, were you thinking, maybe I should let these guys in on the little kind of important fact that, you know what? We've already determined that her hard drive is unrecoverable. Was that ever in the back of your mind when you're answering questions from members of Congress in 4 different committees over the time period when you've already learned significant facts, even though in your mind, as put in your testimony, you didn't fully know that we'd lost them all for good, even though you sort of knew that it was pretty darn likely you'd lost them all for good, in the back of your mind, did you think, you know what, maybe I should fully disclose what the real status is of Ms. Lerner's emails?
As I've testified several times in the past.
That didn't enter your mind at all?
I didn't know that there were emails lost. I personally didn't know, and that's what I was testifying about until the middle of April. When I testified, and I've said this before in several hearings, when I testified on March 26th, I did not know that her emails were not recoverable.
But this is your testimony right here. I'm reading. This is John Koskinen's testimony. In the mid-March 2014 timeframe, we learned the data stored on her computer hard drive was determined to be unrecoverable. So that's certainly before the March 26th hearing and the April 8th hearing in front of the Senate Finance Committee. So you had 2 opportunities where you already know it's unrecoverable. That means you're not going to get what's there.
No, I'm sorry. As I say, I go to the point earlier. I take responsibility for the agency. When I said in that trying to report to people what we knew, that's what the IRS knew. When you ask me specifically what did I know, I knew and didn't know until April, even though if you told me now that Tom Kane said he knew in February, I would henceforth say we as the IRS knew in February. I myself personally did not know.
So when you're...
When I testify, I tell you what I know.
This goes right to the chairman's point. When your chief counsel knows in February, mid-February, that it's unrecoverable, you can't come in front of Congress and say, I didn't know, that's why I didn't answer. Your chief counsel knows. You should have known. And you should have disclosed that. And you didn't.
I didn't know, and and therefore couldn't disclose. And you're exactly right. I have not hidden behind the fact that somehow this is somebody else's responsibility. I am perfectly prepared to take full responsibility for exactly what we did with the production of the information to the Congress.
And you didn't tell us that in your testimony. You didn't tell us, you know what? In March 26th, when you were answering, you didn't tell us that. It would have been nice if we'd have known at that point. Kate Duvall and Tom Kane already knew it was unrecoverable, but somehow they didn't tell you because you'd have to disclose that when asked about it in Congress? Was that why they didn't tell you?
I have no idea. This was an iterative process. At that point, we were spending most of our time trying to produce all of the information for the determination process, which we were able to do by the middle of March.
This is what no one can figure out. Something this important. Lois Lerner, the lady who sat in your chair and took the fifth, the central figure in this investigation, you lose her emails. Your chief counsel knows in February. The guy, the lawyer in charge of document production knows in February. And they don't tell you, and you can come in front of Congress 4 times and not disclose that. And then when you do learn in April, you can wait until June 13th to tell. That is what the American people are like. No wonder there's a morale concern, and no wonder there's a distrust. That is unbelievable.
Well, can I just add one point? And you have to
See,
talk
we didn't know your chief counsel knew.
You're going to talk to the chief counsel, and she'll tell you what she knew or didn't know.
We already talked to Tom Kane, and he told us she knew.
Right. He knew that, if you go back through there, that the hard drive had a significant problem. We did not know what emails we had. We, in fact, discovered and found 24,000 additional emails from Lois Lerner to other people as
and I appreciate the chairman's indulgence. All I'm saying is this: when Tom Kane, the guy, the lawyer in charge of the document production, the professional who you said does good work at the IRS, when he says unrecoverable, and they knew that in mid-February, and you come to Congress 3 times after they knew that, both he and your chief counselor, and you don't disclose that, you should have known that and you should have told us. And then when you do find out, you wait 2 more months? Come on, we're supposed to buy that? I yield back.
Thank the chairman, and I would point out before I recognize my friend from Pennsylvania is, here we are in say February, March, saying you didn't know how many learner emails were out there, and granted, you were not commissioner during this whole time, but we've been asking for these things for over a year now. Subpoena was sent in August, reissued under your watch, and so the IRS dragged its feet on that, and I realize a lot of that is not necessarily on your watch, but don't tell me 9-10 months after we request this stuff and 5 or 6 months after the subpoena is issued, somehow you just don't know how many emails you have. That should have been something that should have been ascertainable. Thank you for the indulgence, and I will recognize Mr. Cartwright.
Thank you, Mr. Chair Pro Tem. Speaking of things that would be nice to know and things not disclosed, Mr. Koskinen, I asked the chairman of this full committee who the witnesses are supposed to be next Wednesday from the IRS. He declined to tell me. He declined to tell me whether he even knew who the witnesses next week will be. But I didn't ask you, Mr. Koskinen. This is your department. Do you know, have you been informed by anybody on this committee who the witnesses sought for next week's hearing will be?
Until I came to this committee meeting, I had no idea that the committee was going to hold yet another hearing next week.
And would you agree with me that those are among the things that would be nice to know?
It's always nice to know in advance when we're supposed to show up for a hearing. I don't know whether I'm expected to show up again next Wednesday.
Well, neither do I. Well, let's delve into the IRS forensic lab together, shall we? There were comments today about scratches on hard drives, and that's not my area of expertise, and I dare say it's not yours either. But we did have John Minsek, an analyst from the IRS Criminal Investigations Unit, meet with Ways and Means staff on Monday. He told them he did not find anything suspicious about how a scratch got on Ms. Lerner's hard drive. The analyst, Mr. Minsek, said that he tried to recover Ms. Lerner's documents on 2 occasions, first with a normal tool set, and then using more advanced tools. He still couldn't recover any data. Mr. Commissioner, contemporaneous emails confirm that the IRS Criminal Investigations Unit could not recover her documents. Am I correct in that?
That's correct.
And the CI analyst, Mr. Minsek, then told Ways and Means Committee staff that he gave his colleague in the IRS IT shop the name of a third-party vendor that he used on rare occasions to recover information, but IRS IT staff had already consulted with outside experts at HP. Mr. Koskinen, do you know if IRS officials consulted with IT experts a second time in 2011 to recover Ms. Lerner's emails?
I do not know.
Okay. All right. And finally, I want to touch on something that the gentlelady from Wyoming mentioned. She just said that her constituents are going to take matters into their own hands. I say this because about an hour ago, somebody walked into the Cannon House office building with a handgun, according to Chad Peregram, our friend from Fox News locally. Knowing that there are over 4,000 staffers and interns at risk here on the House side of the Capitol, and recalling the horrible Gabby Giffords tragedy and the loss of staffer Gabriel Zimmerman, I would ask that members refrain from making statements that could even possibly be misconstrued by the public as an invitation to do anything like that. It's obvious that Representative Lummis meant no such thing, but I think it behooves all of us to be very careful about the way we phrase things, because there are people out there ready and able to misconstrue things. With that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Collins.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate it. Ms. Koskinen, here we go again. I told a story last time, and it was the story of my young son who, to some media reports, became famous, I guess, or infamous, however you want to describe it, on the stories that he used to tell, and I recounted this timeline, and it just, I wish I could sit here today and see you again and say that what was not plausible then is now gotten a little more plausible, and it just seems to not have gotten any more plausible. We still continue, and people ask, why are we continuing to do this? Because it just looks like, there's something new comes out all the time. One request will say this, there's another request, and it was asked earlier, I had to leave and come back, and it said, how much, paperwork that you've put to the committee, and how many hours are being worked on to restore trust in a relationship, whether it is between two people or whether it's between government and the people that they serve. It should really be of no limit to restore that trust, especially with the IRS. So, frankly, to tell me that you gave 1 million documents and that your hours are spending on, because of the issues that have been raised and the lack of trust on both sides, I have Democrats and Republicans in my district who are appalled at this. And they want it solved. They want the real answers, and they want to continue, and they don't want to keep reading every week in the paper that something new's come up. I think that is an issue of trust that has to be maintained here. And frankly, the plausibility story is just, again, getting to the level of unbelievable in a lot of ways. But I do have some questions, because we've talked about the Lois Lerner emails. But in addition to those, the committee has also asked for other emails, and I want to talk to you about those for just a second to see the status of those opinions. Is that okay?
Sure.
Okay. Holly Paz emails from responsive to the committee's request from August 2nd, 2013 to February 14th, 2014. Have you gathered all of those emails?
We provided all of the emails with regard to the determination process. And again, pursuant to what I thought were agreed upon search terms, but apparently not totally agreed with the investigating committees, that we would select 83 custodians who were the ones most likely to be involved, and that we would search.
Which are those same 83 that a quarter of them hard drives crashed?
When it's not clear a quarter, there's at this point nobody knows what that answer is. But
so we could have more that have crashed.
We could have more, we could have less. I don't know until we find out.
Does that just not boggle the mind that of a small number, about a quarter, and we can argue back and forth, a quarter, not a quarter, I'm not a mathematician, neither are you, but that there may be others in that subset that deals with the areas we're asking for?
Yes, and that's a perfect example as to why it would be very helpful had we been able to complete the investigation of what happened to the custodians. We could tell you. The reason I actually decided we would continue to find out how many Lois Lerner emails we had was because if we hadn't been able to do that, people would be talking about there are
let's not change the question. I asked about Holly Pass.
Okay, but
we get away from Lerner. I ask about Holly.
Okay, no, but my point is that we provide, to the extent we can provide the full story, your point, then it's a lot easier to know, and you can disagree about it, but it's a lot better to know what the total picture is. So when you get to custodians, because the IG is now doing that, we don't know what the answer is, so it may be 10, it may be 20, it may be 5, it may be 25, I don't know. And at this point, we aren't able to investigate that. We're hoping the IG, when he completes his investigation, would include we'll conclude with the custodians as well.
Well, that's another source of
That's the
contention
problem.
about
Anyway, it's part of the problem with doing this in dribs and drabs,
understand.
and every day having a press release about some aspect of some interview.
Thank you for saying drips and drabs, because that is what this investigation, it seems like it has been ever since we started, and especially even from your comments and others, that every day we get drips and drabs, and the people are tired of it, this Congress is tired of it, and this is the problem we have, because I'm going to assume from your question, I'm an attorney as well, that that's a no. After all you said, you've not gathered all our emails, or that you don't know if you've gathered all their emails.
No, that's exactly right. I didn't mean to be evasive. We provided all of the emails that were determined to be relevant to the determination process. We have not yet provided all of her emails, because our first priority, agreed with this committee in March, was we would find all of Lois Lerner's emails.
So no. So the question, William Wilkins, same question. Yes or no?
Same answer. You've got all of his emails that are responsive to the investigation that started all of this.
Okay, but no to all. Jonathan Davis, same question.
Again, you've got all of his.
No. I mean, because if this one, all is all. I mean, we had this conversation 3 months ago.
And as I said in March, we're happy to keep working with you to figure out what your next priority is. Obviously, thanks to the system, we can't produce it all at once. We've actually produced a lot of stuff, and it takes us a long time. Part of the background in the June 13th public report was to try to explain why, with our system, it takes so long to produce this stuff. We should not have to spend $18 million. We should have a better system. There's no doubt about that.
I don't disagree. And the question I have there is that, is we need them all in the sense of, the clarification issue here, and we just not got that. I do have one quick, I want to go back to something that was asked a lot earlier, and it was, I believe, from my gentleman friend from South Carolina. He said, we confirmed. And you said, I don't know who told me. And I've said through, this will be my third, I guess, with you listening. And there's been a lot of meetings in which you were told information, but you don't remember who was in the meeting. Or you don't know who told you that. And it hit me as I was sitting here. Maybe there were multiple people in the room, and you're not sure who said it first or who told you first. So I'm going to ask it differently. I don't want to know who told you first or last. I'm not being specific in that nature. I want to know who was in the room when you were told that we have confirmed all that. Who was, and surely you're a very bright individual. You would know at least who was in the room.
I have 12 meetings a day on average.
I do as well. I know most of the ones in the meeting, especially when it's senior staff on something of this nature.
And those meetings average probably 8 to 10 people, so I cannot tell you about any meeting who was actually in the room, but I can tell you who was likely in the room, and that is the people who have been working on the production with your staff. Obviously, my counselor was in the room. Probably my chief of staff was in the room, but I can't tell you, and I don't recall because it wasn't significant at the time, who else was in the room. We were reviewing the document.
It was significant at the time that you may have lost email. That was not a significant meeting.
The issue here was whether we could confirm. Your question was whether we could
confirm. Okay, but you're dealing in a bigger issue. I said, is that not significant?
This entire issue is significant, but I'm actually running an agency that has to deal with filing seasons. We have overseas voluntary disclosure programs. We have voluntary tax return programs we've been putting out. We've been simplifying for small charitable organizations.
And look, I understand that, and that is a great diversion to what we're asking right here. I get that the IRS has other issues, but I also get that the American people, even over years of making fun and doing everything else that unfortunately the IRS has had in the past, it's not now just the fact that they don't like the IRS because they have to send their money in. They're now where there is an issue, both party line irregardless, they're not sure about the IRS because they don't trust the IRS anymore. And when that is an issue, everything should be focused on that. And this is the question that makes it just completely implausible on we keep getting dribs and drabs. I appreciate what you said on dribs and drabs because that's the problem we have right now. And that's how you
Right. Could I just make one point clear, and that is nobody has a greater interest of getting you all the information you need and getting closure on this than I do and the people at the IRS. If we could conclude one of these 6 investigations, find out what the determination of facts are and the recommendations are, we're delighted to take those recommendations. We've accepted all of the Inspector General's recommendations. The last thing in the world that benefits us is to have this go on any longer than necessary. So whatever we can do, as fast as we can produce documents, the relevance of the 960,000 pages isn't that a big amount. it takes a lot of time to get all that done in our system.
The one thing we will agree upon is getting to the end of this is the end result, so that we can move on this and the people can restore the trust in a government agency in which they need to have trust that they don't have now. With that,
The gentleman's time has expired. I'm going to recognize the gentleman from California for 5 minutes.
This is round 4.
No, listen. When people yielded me time under our arcane rules, that doesn't count.
Okay.
But I'll be brief. Commissioner, we have a history, and I want to make sure I get the history straight today because it does matter for this committee. You constantly talk about this agreement, discovery, and so on. Were you aware that we considered that the IRS was stonewalling us and giving us information we didn't want and giving it to us in an order we didn't like it in the months of May, June, and July of 2013?
I was not aware of that.
Well, we have a number of letters basically showing our dissatisfaction, including what we now know to be erroneous information, misleading information that would imply that progressives were being targeted, the false narrative that continues to be used at times. On May 22nd, 2013, Lois Lerner took the fifth. Shortly after that, she became a person of extreme interest for this committee because, in fact, she had made statements outside of her assertion of the fifth that she broke no rules, she broke no regulations. She additionally authenticated earlier testimony and statements. Again, after she took the fifth, she then went back on the record. So under oath, she'd made a number of statements. As we began investigating, we became very aware that Lois Lerner was an active participant in Washington of targeting conservatives. In addition, in evaluating her history, we became very aware that she did not like conservatives and she had that sort of predisposition. Plus, her public speeches made it very clear that on behalf of the president, quote, they want us to fix this, and certainly the president had been the outgoing spokesperson against Citizens United, that we had every reason to focus our investigation on her as the hub in a hub and spoke system of deliberately targeting conservatives for their values. Therefore, I issued, if the ranking member were here, he'd call it unilateral, but pursuant to the committee rules, I issued a subpoena and made it very clear that our first priority was to have all of Lois Lerner's emails and that was the priority. Were you aware of that?
I'm aware of that subpoena, yes.
And you were aware of that was our goal?
We have 8 items on that subpoena, and that's at the top of the list.
Very good. Therefore, when we interviewed Thomas Kane, and we asked him, so is it fair to say this subpoena had no, and this is the subpoena of August 2nd, this subpoena had no impact on the process? That was our question. His answer, it didn't impact our production process. That's correct. Question, did it have any impact on which documents were chosen to review? Answer, no. Additionally, throughout that transcribed interview, what we discovered was that you all met, had a discussion, if you will, and decided that you were not going to prioritize any aspect of delivery of Lois Lerner's documents, even though she had taken the fifth before this committee, even though she clearly had public statements, and she had been a person who had already unlawfully leaked, by planting a question, the outcome of an IRS a TIGTA investigation. All of that is undeniable. Why in the world should the American people believe that you're cooperating with us when I issue a subpoena, our committee makes it clear in multiple letters that these are our priorities, and now we have sworn testimony or testimony under penalty of perjury, that you didn't make any changes. You basically continued business as usual, which was delivering us based on, you call it mutually agreed, but they were your criteria primarily as to search terms, and never disclosed to us that those search terms were searching but a small portion of what should have been the entire database. Do you have an answer for that?
Well, I wasn't there. My understanding is there are 5 other investigations that are now going on and were going on then. that there were a wide range of requests for documents from Senate Finance Committee, Ways and Means, Permanent Subcommittee, as well as...
Did any of them issue binding subpoenas?
And I don't think anyone else had a binding subpoena. My understanding, and I wasn't there, was
But after February 2014, we issued another subpoena. Did anything change then?
at that point we were, as I've testified before, we began to pull the rest of Lois Lerner's emails. So we started with the analysis of the emails already produced, and that's where it was discovered that there were fewer emails in the 2011 period. We completed, one of the priorities at that time, though, competing priorities, was to complete the production of the determination documents that everybody was interested in. There was kind of I gather, a process by which, with all of the conflicting questions, to try to respond to documents that met as many of the requests as possible. And most of the requests certainly for finance, and at that time Ways and Means, were for documents around the determination process. That was completed, and then since that time, the full court press has been to produce all of Lois Lerner's emails, for whether in her account or any other account.
Thank you. Earlier on, I asked you for a discovery process of who was looking for when throughout a timeline, and your assistant took it in very copious notes there. I want to just add one clarification to that process. Obviously, we're interested in what you did during subpoenas, but we're getting that. You have delivered some, I guess we're looking at an exorbitant number of documents that you constantly, and many people constantly, cite. What we don't understand, that I think the committee has an absolute obligation to understand, is in this process of what you looked and where you looked, understanding the sources that this has come from. Because we're a committee of oversight and reform, we're a committee that has an obligation to see that you spend the American people's money properly. It appears from this side of the dais as though the process is very fragmented, that in fact you're looking sort of under cookie jars, to use an expression of my youth, that you're providing large amounts of data from certain periods that, based on a 6-month backup and a very small server capacity, wouldn't exist. So that means that they probably came from other places. And we need to understand all the places they came from, where you went. You sent us, in many cases, hugely redundant emails. In other words, the same emails can come from multiple places. Understanding that so that we can figure out how to prevent it in the future is important, because this is not the last time that a federal judge, an IG, or a congressional committee is going to want to know details. I think we can all agree to that. Just as corporate America receives countless subpoenas for document production, so much so that they've developed software explicitly to do these kinds of searches, and retention policies for that reason. Can we have your agreement that we'll receive some accounting of how that happens?
And we'd be glad to talk further with your staff to make sure we give you exactly what you need. But we did, you're exactly right. We looked in the logical places, and I understand we looked under every cookie jar. We actually were dedicated to making sure that we found every existent Lois Lerner email on her account or anybody else's, so that we would be able to say, these are all the Lois Lerner emails we have, and that's led to 67,000.
And I will make a rather unusual request in this case. We're more than happy to have a small group briefing meeting, bipartisan meeting, with the individuals who have been involved in this, so that, separate from the investigation, which is important and ongoing, the question of efficiency, the cost effect of fragmented data, the cost effect of having, and I held it up several other times, individual drives like this that people have, notebooks that have been taken offline, all the other things that I suspect are one of the reasons this has become so expensive and difficult. That meeting is not exactly on course with this investigation, but it is separately a question from a standpoint of the management of the $82 billion worth of funds that government spends, to see if in fact policy changes with OMB and others should be instituted and funding allocated so that this kind of fragmentation doesn't happen in the future. So as one person who's worked in private America to another, that's something that your briefing can be informal, off the record, doesn't have to be definitive, But our committee, I think, really has to have an understanding so we can be part of policy formation, because what I know about how corporate America does it and what I'm beginning to glean you have to do are very different.
They're very different. As I've said, I asked that question some time ago, that we should not have to spend $18 million discovery process go, and then what are the problems of that going forward? Because it is my understanding that there has been a tremendous amount of effort made to the committee. It is a lengthy process. Again, the June 13th report starts out trying to explain to all of the investigators what the process is and why it is so anachronistic and so difficult. And I agree with you totally. Going forward, it would certainly help all of us if we had a more efficient system for preserving and finding documents and emails.
Thank you, Commissioner. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back, and that concludes our hearing today. Thank you, Mr. Commissioner, and the hearing is adjourned.
Good.